Okay. YouTube, can you hear me now? And we are now live. Welcome to the delegates and staff who are tuned in right now to opening ceremonies for SOMA XLVIII. We are thrilled to have you here right now, and we're very excited for the committee sessions and the events that we're going to be hosting this weekend for you. We are joined by the SOMA Secretariat right now, our staff advisor, Mr. Cook, as well as Kat Krieger, the elder and residents at UTS. At this time, we do have plenty of time to get through opening ceremonies until Dr. Peter Singer, our keynote speaker, joins us. So at this time, we're going to do a land acknowledgement, and we will have plenty of time for that. There's absolutely no time constraints. So at this time, I'm going to throw over to Kat.
So, thank you. It's nice to sort of see everyone and that everybody's gathered here today. I'm going to start off with a traditional smudge, which is, an indigenous way of opening or gathering or bringing people together. For those of you that have not experienced the smudge before, what this one's going to consist of is I have some sage, some sacred sage here in an abalone shell. That's going to be lit. And I do ask that everyone take a moment to kind of focus on what it is we're here for. And, I wish we could have a big fire and a giant circle of people around it to share all that. But with this sage, we take a moment to leave negativity outside of our circle, outside of our gathering, to bring ourselves together one mind. And there's a metaphoric cleansing, spiritual cleansing with that sage, with that smoke that we wash our hands in that smoke. We take some over our brain, our mind, over our heart. We breathe a little bit in, over our eyes, over our ears, and to the space and all the people around us. I'm sorry you can't smell it because it has a beautiful smell that you never forget. And it does have that spiritual component to it. I don't do this as a religious ceremony. I do it more as a spiritual grounding, as a moment to however you will in your own mind or your own way to give your thoughts into having this go well and in a good and beautiful way. That we, as I said, come together one mind. And I'll introduce myself in the old style. Sego Tansi, Wenbourgeois, Skano, Makwagish Gadan Dijnakas, Jikan Dodam, Kugan Dunjba, Kuga Nishnabe and Dao, Niwa Gaja Conditionakas. Ambi Majada, Jibabi Dave, and Genegi Gomi Nagain, the Ba. Me which also Skobini Que, Niwa Manado Kisis, Manado Nokmas, Miwa Gichugumi Medewa Bo, Miwi Shaganash Shishbangi. So, in that Anishinaabe Mo and that Ojibwe language, and I don't speak it very well, I have to say that right off. What I did was tell you my spirit name, which is Makwagishgat, which means sky bear, or like one of the big black bears up north. It can go to sun bear or daytime bear, but it talks about a bear standing in a meadow with a medicine bag around its neck, enjoying the sunshine, or standing there. And that is, in a sense, a healing name. And by that I mean, with that comes the concept of the bears being the ones that carry medicine and healing to all the people, and to help direct and teach about that. A little bit more, it talks about me being Cayugan, part of the Six Nations or the Haudenosaunee people of the Longhouse, as well as having German and English ancestry. It's interesting because I was just at a German conference before this, and to hear that German language for me is another connection to my own ancestry. But we share English at this gathering for the most part today. It also talks a little bit about the lands that I come from. My father, through my grandmother, being Cayugan, from what is now called upstate New York. But the Cayugan and the Finger Lakes lay within there, Oneida, Seneca, some beautiful lake and territory. And it's from the upper part of that region that my grandmother comes from. My mom, she's German English. She comes from the southeast of England, as well as having ancestry from the southwest of Germany. So those are the lands that I come from. These are the places that I'm from. So this area that I'm in right now, which is under the stewardship of the Mississaugas of the Credit, has also seen Indigenous people, physically walk the grounds.
I'm talking, can you guys not take pictures because they'll hear it?
Since the last ice walls moved back about 13,000 years ago. That's a long time to walk in an area or be in an area. And it's with respect due to all those people that, even though I'm Indigenous, it doesn't mean I'm Indigenous to the spot that I'm standing in today. So I respect and honor that. Those words go a little bit more, and I think it's pertinent to what we're gathering for. It talks about the sun rising in the morning and instructing us, reminding us of our instructions as humans, as two-leggeds, that we walk through life spreading light, spreading warmth, and bringing life to everything around us as we go through our life path, our life journey, and that it will always do that. Well, if you're into astrophysics, at least for the next 4.3 billion odd years, it will do that. And then we need a new sun, apparently. But that aside, we respect that sun for reminding us of that, and that we do walk through what we're going to do each day being that way, with the understanding that we respect one another when we do that. The way we talk, the way we walk, the way we sing, the way we pray, the way we dress, the way we carry on relationships, for all those things that we have choice in the way that we want to do, and that we respect one another for that. And that respect has to go both ways. When we build those bridges of relationship, it's really hard to build a bridge from one foundation if there's no other foundation. So that other foundation of respect has to be there as well. The words go a little further and it honors the moon in the sky. And if you go out tonight later on when it's a bit dark and just look straight up, off towards the south a bit, you'll see the moon in the sky. Just past half, I think, heading towards full in a number of days. And it reminds us of that connection to the sun that shares that symbiotic light. It softens it and turns it silver, much like the hair of our ancestors or the old knowledge keepers from all our cultures, all our races. We're all indigenous to somewhere, is what I often like to say. Some of us are indigenous to many places, but we're all indigenous to somewhere. And we honor those lands and those people. So that moon that spins around the earth as well, and the earth is spinning. We're all going around the sun, so there's a lot of intricate patterns happening there, but that moon always keeps the same face towards this planet that we live on. This big rock, third rock from the sun, as we say. It goes into the concepts of the big lakes to the south of us. I'm up in Brampton right now, so the closest one is Lake Ontario, which name translates into beautiful water or beautiful lake. And it certainly is. I kind of miss, I used to live in Toronto right on the shore in the beach area, and I miss just being able to hear the waves when I open a window or to walk 50, 60 meters and the water's right there. It's essential for life. So if you were watching the weather in the last few days and the weathermen going, oh, it's going to be terrible weather, and that's almost culturally inappropriate. I say that carefully and with a little bit of humor, because water is essential for life. Some of us come from lands where rain once a year would be awesome. And yet here we are with the water in all different forms coming up to touch us and bless us and remind us that it is essential for life. And these philosophies, these physical things around us, the swimmers, the crawlers, the flyers, the hoofed ones, the winds, the sky, the very land that we walk on, all that works together to make sure we're sheltered, that we're warm, that we're fed. And Earth is giving us so much of that. In fact, recently with climate change and environmental issues and resource extraction, we realized we pushed Mother Earth so far. She spent a few billion years helping us evolve and exist, and now she's in a point where she needs our help. And that's almost like when our parents, our ancestors, our grandparents get older, they've spent their life making sure that we're okay, and then it's time to help them. So there's a reminder in there of the care we need to take and how much effort that takes. And as we come together as a group of people from many different nations, we realize this requires everyone. This requires everyone to work together to build a relationship so that we have some degree of, we combine all our energies and our power to start to do something in a good way. I love that phrase, in a good way. Walk in a good way, be in a good way, live in a good way. That's such a simple philosophy, and it might cover everything that's required of us as humans. So I mentioned I'm also Cayugan, and that being part part Cayugan means I come from the Haudenosaunee people, which means people of the Longhouse. We live in extended family units, or used to, not that long ago, as far as time goes. And that as Haudenosaunee people, I'm also part of the Six Nations. Used to be 5 nations, kind of around contact time, and then it grew into 6 nations. So I like to think before contact, before the 1400s, notice I call it contact, not discovery. We already knew we were here. Nobody had to tell us. And I say that with humor as well, because wherever we went, wherever people traveled from other lands, they met other people. And we as humans have a choice. It's one of the gifts, by the way, in some of our teachings we talk about. We are the two-leggeds. All the animals, they do what they need to do. We say they sing their song. The deer is a deer, the bear is a bear, the blue jay is a blue jay. You won't see a blue jay trying to be a bear, but they have their ways of being and acting and singing the song that they sing. And they are all essential. We know through environmental studies, we knew it anyways, but through environmental studies, if we take one thing out of the woods, if we take one thing out of the rainforest, it affects, it kind of cripples the biodiversity of that. And I think we as peoples from many different lands, every single one of us, every single land, every place that we're indigenous to is important in the survival of this earth as we know it. Maybe not as we know it, because it could certainly use a little bit of changing, but you follow my philosophy, I hope. So when we come together with the idea of United Nations, people gathering together, and the idea that, before contact, before the 1400s, we had to work on it for a while, the Six Nations people already had a UN. I like to think sometimes maybe that's what the idea of United Nations was modeled after. I know in other places in the world, other groups had come together as well to form alliances, to form allyships. Quite often out of defense or maybe for war, but I think that needs to change, or is changing even today as we speak. So that, I'll come back to that idea of as a human, we are given the gift of choice. We can go and do where we want. We can live in different environments. The animals are a little bit more restricted. And the animals, they have something that's a little bit more difficult to get through life, and that is, if they make a mistake, if you're an animal out bush and you make a mistake, it can be terminal really quickly. You don't usually get the chance to make 2 mistakes. If you're a deer and wolves are chasing you and you get away, wonderful, you've learned something. If you make a mistake, it's bad news. You don't usually get a chance to repeat that mistake. As humans, we can make mistakes, look at it, learn from it, maybe make the same mistakes a few times and get away with it. But I think we should be obliged to change once we realize we're doing something wrong. And certainly as a planet, interaction among humans has so many examples over history of doing it wrong. And it's time to start doing things right, to reach out in a good way to one another, to offer that help. Within my words, I also said that I'm turtle clan. What that means is, because my culture is matriarchal, it comes down through my grandmother, that the traveling of those clans from one generation to another was interrupted by residential schools and by colonization. But the best I can do is go through my dad's side, through my grandmother, and be the best turtle clan person I can. The reason I mention this is because it actually designates my DNA relatives as well within my nation, within my group of people. But even outside of that, I go to a different territory and travel, and they also have turtle clan. Those were the people that would welcome you into their lodge. Those were the people that would say, oh, here's food. Here's a place by the fire. Here's a blanket to keep you warm. And I would love to see something like that spread worldwide. And I think sometimes that's the foundation of what we're trying to do when we come together and we say those words, United Nations. And what do they carry? Words can carry a lot, or they can be hollow. But when we say United Nations, we're not uniting against someone else. We're uniting together for the common good of all. So within those words, within those philosophies, we have a lot of work to do. I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, so that I, at this point, have 65 winters behind me. We used to call them winters. And after all those years of seeing so many changes, and I know as young people, when you come into this world, the time span that you exist in is your reference point. So for me, I can go back, and it was not long after the Second World War that I was born. And to see the changes when people came out of that and said, hey, we don't want to do this again. And yes, there's been conflicts and wars since then. We're still learning. I think the concept of learning says, if I learn something, I should learn from what I learn as well. My little boy, I like to refer to him, he's not little anymore. Wow. When he was about 5, he was doing something that wasn't correct. And there's that daddy moment. You've either experienced this coming from your parents or guardian or father, or at some point will maybe have your own family. But I told him, stop doing that. That's not right. And he said, sorry. And I said, you have this daddy moment, and I've spoken about this before, but it's so important in this. It was, do you even know what sorry means? And he says, yes. I promise never to do it again. That's what sorry means. And I was so moved by that comment and what he had just taught me that would apply to every single person on the planet. When we see something wrong or we're doing something wrong and we say, I'm sorry, are we promising never to do it again? And that's part of what that means. We see these conflicts. Are we sorry? Do we promise never to do it again? And the more of us that understand, and the more of us that connect to that philosophy, the less chance of things going wrong, as I politely call it, going wrong in the future. And there is no implied punishment or reward. And he spoke to that as well as, well, do you know why you should do it this other way? He goes, well, I should do it the right way. Not because I'll get a reward, not because I'll get in trouble if I don't, just because it's the right way to do things. And I said something like, please remember that. We'll come back to that when you're 16 or 17. So that's what we're doing. We're gathering to understand and learn about promising never to do it again. We're gathering to understand the requirement to build bridges where there's a foundation that's strong on each side, those relationship bridges that we talk about, to understand one another. Part of the reason I attended a German conference today is because I have a mindset that I want to learn German again. I knew it when I was little, but I lost it. We share in English today. I sort of speak English fairly well. It's my brought-up tongue language, but there was German there as well. And then I was asked one day why I didn't know my indigenous language. And by the way, my language is kind of dying out. I think there's 200 or 300 speakers left as far as we know in the world. It's really hard to learn when you rarely hear your own language. I can Google it now and hear it. It's not the same as having a conversation. So speaking in our language from our hearts. When I did the smudge, I said, let's speak from our hearts. Let's look at things with our hearts. Let's touch things with our hearts. Let's think with our hearts. And less importantly, listen to one another with our hearts. The words that we receive in our old style of learning, the oral teaching culture, also implied that you were listening. So there was a two-way balance. Again, that bridge, that relationship. Somebody's speaking knowledge, I'm learning knowledge. Where do we store that? Do we store it in our brain? I guess technically, yes. Most often, though, I find I look into my heart for things I want to remember. That's where I store all the nice things. They go through that filter of my heart. If they're not nice, maybe I shouldn't carry them. And I know we'll make mistakes as we walk down these roads towards a better planet, but do we pick our mistakes up and carry them, or do we leave them where they are and warn others about where they are? I always talk about walking through the bush and you trip over a log. You've made a mistake. You look at the log, remember where it is, don't trip over it again. But if you turn around and pick this mistake up, that log, and carry it with you so you remember it, that's a little more difficult. Again, I speak in metaphors. It wouldn't take long and a few times tripping where you'd have so many logs to carry that you tripped over, you would hardly be able to move forward. So we need to put those logs down. We need to warn other people where they are. We need not to trip over them ourselves again. And also, part of that is that interaction between massive groups of people. Do we know each other? Do we take the time to understand and know each other? I tell people sometimes, learn one word in another language that's a nice word. Learn something about other people from another land. ask a question, at the same time provide an answer and share those things. So as we gather around our metaphorical fire today to understand that we are all the same height, all heads the same height, all due equal respect. And this is important. I talked about growing up in the 50s and 60s and what it was like. Racism was, I don't want to say worse than it is now, but things are a lot different. In my eyes, things are a lot better than they used to be. And I want to see that continue to happen. I think if that happens each and every generation, we'll get to a point where these things don't exist. The oppression, the racism, the bullying, all those things that are not what we need in our sacred circle. And this big circle, this big rock that we call Earth, is going to be a lot better place to live in. If you watch the space program, we're now reaching for Mars and the moon. And since we're going to be here the next few million years, I hope at some point we'll reach the stars. And what are we going to carry to those places? Do we carry all our mistakes in our logs, or do we carry just what's in our heart to share in a good way? So I wanted to share those words with you tonight. I also want to leave time for others to speak. But for me, it is really special to be part of this. This didn't exist when I was a kid, nor when it did exist in whatever concept it did as in a high school setting. There would be no way as an Indigenous person I would have been invited to take part in that. So I'm grateful, very grateful to you all. And I got enough years I can keep an eye on you and just see how well you do over the next at least a few decades. I'm going to be around. My grandfather lived till he was about 95, and he was still going quite well. So I look forward to those times, and I'll be able to point at some point in time to somebody way up in the world of politics or control or anti-racism and go, hey, I remember them from an F1 class. And I'll come and shake your hand, I hope, or at least wave. So, miigwech for listening to my words, and walk forward. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Those were some amazing words from you, and I'd like to thank you for providing that land acknowledgement for us today. On another note, I know the Zoom call did not pick up my microphone, but YouTube may have as well. So in case anyone who's watching live right now heard something from my microphone, I just have some eager family members with me today taking pictures, and I just reminded them not to make too much noise. So it's the new online system, and we're getting used to it. So, but I would like to thank Kat for those very amazing words and such an amazing land acknowledgement. I'd also like to thank the SOMA staff and delegates who are tuned into opening ceremonies right now on YouTube. A reminder that you can watch all the delegate events on the UTS Student Broadcast YouTube channel, like you are now, and that we will also be posting the live stream links in your committee Slack channel. Throughout the conference, delegates with questions about SOMA, Model UN procedure, or any other questions for us, especially technical difficulties, should not hesitate to ask a member of SOMA staff for help. You have to remember we're here to assist you and here to support you. And remember, it was not long ago that we were delegates ourselves, so we know what it's like to be in your shoes. I started participating in Model UN in grade 9. At SOMA in 2018, I was the typist in the Economic and Social Council, woefully underprepared, of course, slowly trying to take notes as we had 150 delegates making all their motions. But it was an amazing experience for me, and it really resonated with me in a way that I didn't expect. But I knew from that point that I wanted to continue to engage with Model UN and seek out those opportunities. So I started to attend more conferences as a delegate, first at SUNS in Montreal in November of 2018, then February of 2019, UTMON at U of T, and then finally April of 2019, SOMA once again. Unfortunately, it was the last time we were able to host SOMA. And with each of those experiences, I became more and more certain that Model UN is one of the best tools that we have as high school students, if not the best tool, not only to practice our debate skills and our advocacy skills, but also to put that debate to good use through legislation, resolutions to tackle in concrete ways some of the most pressing issues that challenge our world today. And by arguing from a different perspective, perhaps a perspective that we don't agree with, Model UN forces us to broaden our worldview. and to take on a different perspective, and strengthens in that way our sense of global citizenship. And one of the reasons a person becomes a staff member at a Model UN conference is because they want to help foster that sense of global citizenship. And I can speak for every member of the Secretariat here today that was their intention. And last school year, myself, Sophie, Kyra, and Leah, we joined SOMA Secretariat to help foster and continue that tradition of the constructive dialogues, the concrete solutions, and the lasting memories that our delegates love to associate with SOMA. And we're very proud that they associate that with SOMA. So whether you're joining us from the GTA, elsewhere in Canada, or the United States, we're thrilled to have a record number of American delegates this year. We are here to provide those experiences to you, and it doesn't matter if you've been doing Model UN for 5 years or for 5 minutes, we're here to provide those opportunities to you as well. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to cancel SOMA in 2020, which was a major blow not only to our delegates, but to UTS, our school, to us as SOMA staff, and to the existence of a conference during a global pandemic. And in 2021, it has been a rocky road back, but we are back with over 400 delegates this year, more than 430 in fact, which is by far the largest event UTS has hosted this year, and still the largest high school Model UN conference in the country. And it's something that we're very proud to have, that we have the support of so many schools and delegates around Canada and the world as well. But of course, we wouldn't be here without the Secretariat members whose hard work went unappreciated last year and have gone on to do some great things in university. They graduated and since gone on to do great things. Wendy Wang, Rachel Kim, Rajan Deshpande, Grace Parrish, Alistair Creedy Akazaki, Vedika Jha, and Allison G. So our thoughts will be with them this weekend, and we owe them a big debt of gratitude, because without their hard work last year, we would not have the foundation which we're standing on today. I would also like to thank the current SOMA staff who have pulled some long hours this year, not only fulfilling their usual duties of writing the background guides, refamiliarizing themselves with Model UN procedure, and setting up the behind the scenes for our delegates, but also getting adjusted to this online format. A few weeks ago, we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to test our online systems at a mock conference for grades 7 and 8 students, and we're proud to say it was an amazing success. I'd also like to take this moment to thank the Secretariat specifically. They've bared a lot this year. I've thrown a lot at them this year, especially this online format, and the truth is I wouldn't be delivering this speech now, as well as my previous gaffes on YouTube, without their continuing support over the past 6 months, and it's been an amazing experience working with them this year. And if you have the opportunity to thank a SOMA staff member this weekend, I encourage you to take it, because they really deserve it, and they've been working really hard. And in turn, we have some amazing things planned for our delegates this weekend, starting with our keynote speaker who's joined us now, Dr. Peter Singer, the Special Advisor to the Director General of the WHO, who we'll be hearing from in just a few minutes. I promise I'll try and keep it short. UTS alumni Roman Voschuk will be joining us on Saturday. He's the former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine. And on Sunday, UTS alumni Salvatore Cusimano, a political affairs officer at the United Nations, will be joining us. We are so thankful to have such amazing guest speakers this year, not to mention 2 very accomplished UTS alumni. And in between, we have planned some action-packed hours of committee sessions for you as well. So from the stirring debates that we have in the General Assembly to the chaos and the intrigue of crisis, there's going to be something for everyone this year. And our General Assemblies are once again a linchpin in the Model UN tradition. With the Economic and Social Council, the committee that I got my start in, one of my favorite committees, will challenge delegates to take on a broad set of issues. The WHO will be addressing infectious disease, quite topical of course, but not to mention many more other topics. And the Security Council, new and emerging threats as well as existing threats to nation security around the world. From improving the quality of life in our communities in UN Habitat, to expanding global commerce in the Conference on Trade and Development, to improving our justice system in UNODC, we have an amazing lineup of specialized committees at SOMA, and once again, we're proud to say it's a backbone of SOMA once again. We're also proud to be introducing the Venture Capital Committee this year, which is a committee on entrepreneurship that will challenge delegates to not only make a quick business pitch to their fellow delegates, but to think on their feet, and we're very excited to present that opportunity to delegates as well. Our crisis staff have a lot planned for their committees, as they always do, whether it's the possible drama in Seoul and ad hoc, or the possible civil war in the Joint Crisis Committee. There's going to be a lot for our delegates this year. We are always impressed by the quality of the debate we see from you, the professional way in which you carry yourselves, and the groundbreaking resolutions you put into action. It is our hope to provide you the amazing memories Model UN has given us in the past, especially SOMA, and lasting memories that will outlast this temporary pandemic, which hopefully we'll be able to put behind us very soon. So without further ado, I now declare SOMA XLVIII, the 48th Southern Ontario Model United Nations Assembly, officially open. All right, so with that, I've taken a quick check at the time, and I'd like us to get to Dr. Singer as soon as possible, but I'd also like to give our Secretariat a few moments just to introduce themselves and say a few words as well, but I promise Dr. Singer that we will get to him as soon as possible. We are a bit behind schedule. My previous error with the mute button certainly didn't help. All right. I'll leave it to the floor so the Secretary can pick it up from here.
Okay, I'll just get us started. So I'm Leah. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently the Director General of SOMA. I've been involved in SOMA for 4 years now as a page, crisis staff, and Secretariat member. SOMA is always a highlight of my year, and I'm so glad that we're able to host it this year despite the unusual circumstances. And I'll be chairing the World Health Organization Committee, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting you all over the next few days.
I can go next. Hello, my name is Kyra. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Commissioner General of SOMA and also the chair of the ECOSOC 1 committee. SOMA has been a very, very special part of my high school experience. I've been involved in SOMA since grade 9 as a member of the crisis team, as a chair, and now as a member of the Secretariat. And from performing skits with wigs and stories for crisis to meeting with the Secretariat every week to plan our first online conference, it's been an incredible opportunity. And so I'm looking forward to meeting all of you over the next few days, and I hope you have a lovely conference.
Hi, my name is Sophie, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am the Chief of Staff at this year's conference. I also joined SOMA in grade 9, and I've been involved as a delegate and on Secretariat, and I'm very excited to meet everyone at this year's conference. I've had the amazing privilege of working with all the typists and chairs and seconders and doing lots of training and getting to know everyone who's running all the committees, and I can tell you your committees are in great hands, and I look forward to seeing everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Wendy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Under Secretary General for Publicity. My role was originally operations for this year, but obviously with the shift online, we have to adapt. I got involved with Model UN in grade 10, and it's been an amazing experience, and I've been able to travel to places like Denmark and Montreal for conferences, so that was a life-changing experience, to be honest. I hope you guys all have an amazing time at SOMA, and I'm excited to see you all.
Hi, my name is Ira. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Undersecretary General of Outreach of SOMA. I've been in Model UN and SOMA since grade 10 as a delegate, a junior director for a crisis that was unfortunately canceled, and now a chair of UNSC 1 and a member of Secretariat. I absolutely love SOMA. It's always so creative and so full of energy every year. I think maybe my favorite memory is being voted biggest snake in crisis. But I'm so glad you all get to be a part of it. Please have a great conference, everyone, and I look forward to meeting you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anirudh. I go by he, him pronouns. And this year, I'm going to be the Undersecretary General of SOMA Crisis. I've been involved in SOMA since grade 9, first as a delegate, then as a chair, then as a junior crisis director, and now as the leader of crisis. And I remember that before I started SOMA, I used to be extremely shy and, reserved, but being in a public forum has really allowed me to become more confident in advocating for what I believe in. I'm so excited to have overseen our 3 online crises this year, from Crisis Republicans versus Democrats, Civil War in the USA, to the Gandam neighborhood protecting itself from the purge in Seoul for ad hoc. Crisis would be nothing this year after so much hard work from the entire crisis staff, so shout out to them, and shout out to my co-leaders Phoebe, Robert, and Felicity, without whom crisis would not have been possible at all. I'm really excited to see all of you guys in ad hoc these next few days, and I hope the best for delegates and all the committees. Thanks, guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Cooper. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Undersecretary General originally of Operations, but like Wendy, that shifted a bit because of the pandemic, so I focused on outreach this year. I've been a part of SOMA since grade 9 as well, originally through Crisis, and I think Matthew said it really well, that SOMA resonated with me in ways I didn't expect, and it was kind of one of the best experiences I've had at this school, so I'm very excited to be back here 2 years later. And wish everyone an amazing conference. Yes, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Undersecretary General of Finance this year and the chair for the second EcoSoc committee. I still remember my first year of SOMA, I was really nervous, not as a delegate, but as like this lowly page who lost at least 20 notes. So I'm super happy to not have that issue as a chair for virtual SOMA this year. I'm also really excited to meet and work with all the delegates, even if it's through the screen. And I hope at this conference you can collaborate and compromise to address international issues, but also have fun while laboring to establish world peace. So good luck, delegate.
Hi everyone, my name is Shelby and I go by pronouns she, her. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff of SOMA this year and I'm also the chair of UNCTAD, or Conference on Trade and Development. I also joined SOMA in grade 9, so this is my third year. Like Ella, I've been a lowly page, and I've also been a member of Crisis staff, but unfortunately it was canceled last year. But one thing I really love about MUN is I've been able to make so many friendships with people from all over the country, and I'm sure they're ones that I'll keep for a lifetime. So I'm really excited to meet everyone this year, and I can't wait to see what amazing things will come out of this year's conference.
Hey everyone, my name is Richard Cook. I'm the UTS staff advisor to SOMA this year. I just wanted to welcome you all to the conference and just let you know that you're in very good hands. This is an amazing group of student leaders that I've had the privilege to work with, and I'm very happy to have gotten this time with them. I also wanted to send a message if there are any concerns that you have, questions about the conference, particularly staff advisors, please don't hesitate to send me an email, reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And that's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I'm sorry I almost interrupted you there, and also apologies for the general sounds that are coming in through my house right now. Without further ado, I apologize to Dr. Singer for the delay, but I will now take this opportunity to introduce him. Dr. Singer was the CEO of Grand Challenges Canada between 2008 and 2018. An initiative which oversaw innovative global health projects and public health projects in over 90 countries worldwide. In 2011, he was appointed Officer of the Order of Canada, and he has co-authored the book The Grandest Challenge, Taking Life-Saving Science from Lab to Village, not to mention over 300 articles as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Singer for his keynote speech, and I'll also remind delegates that we were having a brief Q&A session after the speech. They can find the link to the Google form to ask questions in the description of this video. I will also be posting it on the Slack channel, hopefully not making too much noise as I do so. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Singer.
Well, thank you very much, Matt and Leah and the whole group. I want to start actually by expressing my respect and appreciation to Kat Krieger for the land acknowledgement. And my pronouns are he, him. And, Matt, in your introduction, you said if you have the opportunity, thank a SOMA member. So I have the opportunity. So I'm going to thank all of you for the work that you do. The WHO is a UN specialized agency. So, kind of late in life, I became a senior United Nations official, and it's so wonderful to see young people reflecting upon the United Nations earlier in life, and that picks up, Matt, your point about global citizenship as well. In about 3 or 4 weeks, we have the World Health Assembly, which is essentially a United Nations-like gathering. And I'll allude to that as we go along. By the way, My Twitter handle is @PeterAsinger. Feel free to tweet any of this. If you follow, we'll be able to continue the conversation after this. So I want to start again by expressing my appreciation for being with you and also my appreciation for everything that you do. I'm going to focus in on COVID, as was mentioned, COVID-19. That's probably certainly the most significant global health crisis, unfortunately, that the world's experienced in 100 years, maybe the most significant global crisis in 70 years. Almost 150 million reported cases, sadly 3 million deaths, and a loss of lives and livelihoods, and it's not over yet. If there's one lesson in COVID, it is equity, equity, equity. I guess that's 3 lessons. But that's really the lesson of COVID, whether you're talking about social determinants, like the terrible, heart-wrenching stories you're seeing now of essential workers in the intensive care units across Canada as the cases are rising, which I believe is the darkness before the dawn, and there is hope that is coming. Or whether it's the topic of vaccine equity, which is where I will focus. It's really a key issue in the pandemic, maybe the most important issue, because COVID has shone a very harsh light on the pre-existing social and economic inequities in Canada and around the world. And the opportunity, though, is therefore, when we move into the recovery, to be redressing those inequities. I mentioned that I'm really privileged to speak with young people, and that's because of all the people in the world, equity is really in your hands. You know, we often think about that as something that's distant or something that's somebody else does, or heads of state or political leaders, and that's certainly true. Those decisions are very consequential. But same at the community level, and even more so in respect to young people. So my key message is that equity is really in your hands. And I'm going to focus in this talk on vaccine equity, but I want you also to think more generally about equity, and we can certainly get into that in the discussion period. And towards the end of the talk, I'm going to come back to my theme of young people and maybe share some lessons about some lessons you might consider as you look forward in terms of how you can effectively advocate and solve some of these problems, including the problems of equity so revealed by COVID. So with that, I'm going to zero in now on the issue of vaccine equity, which is maybe the defining challenge of 2021. Before I do that, I do want to say that as we all work together to defeat COVID, it really is a 1-2 punch. It's the new scientific tools like vaccines, and it's also the public health measures, masking, physical distancing, meeting outdoors, opening the windows, avoiding poorly ventilated indoor spaces. So even though I'm going to focus on vaccine equity, please continue with the public health measures, which are so important, even at this point in the pandemic. On vaccine equity, I'm going to really address 3 key topics. One is, what is it? So just describing the contours of the problem. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why it's important. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about what we can do about it. And then look forward a little bit to where this might come into contact with the World Health Assembly in the spirit of your model UN. And then I'll come back at the close to the topic dear to my heart, which is young people. So vaccine equity, what is it? You know, the first thing to say is it's been an amazing scientific effort. When I was in medical school, even at Grand Challenges Canada, the received wisdom was it took 10 or 15 years to develop a vaccine. Well, here we are with the situation where 1 year into the pandemic, actually on the last day of 2020, the first vaccine received emergency use authorization from the World Health Organization. And now several vaccines have, and several vaccines are being used around the world. So the first thing to say is that's an unprecedented scientific effort, an unprecedented scientific accomplishment within 1 year to go from when WHO first heard of the outbreak and in Wuhan, which was on December 31st, 2019, to the point at which the first vaccine was authorized, which was December 31st, 2020, a 1 year period, is an amazing accomplishment. Now, having said that, it's not enough to have the scientific accomplishment. You also need the ethical accomplishment of equity and access around the world. Almost 1 billion doses of vaccine have been administered, of vaccines, plural, because there's several. Almost 1 billion doses of vaccines have been administered around the world. But the fact is that 83% of those doses have been administered in either high-income countries or upper-middle-income countries. So in a country like Canada, the latest figure I saw is that 27% of Canadians have received a dose of, at least a single dose of a COVID vaccine. So just over 1 in 4, Canada, of course, being a high-income country. In low-income countries, that number is less than 1%. So 1 in 4 versus 1 in 100. That is vaccine equity, or put more bluntly, vaccine inequity. So we're now in a situation where there actually is inequitable distribution of vaccine among countries. Of course, that's also the case within countries, or can be the case within countries, but I'm going to focus on the global vaccine equity or inequity. So that's the first thing I wanted to essentially establish, which is unprecedented scientific accomplishment, very potent vaccines, very effective at reducing death, reducing hospitalization, and it's early days, but starting to look like reducing transmission as well, but very inequitably rolled out around the world, with 1 in 4 in Canada versus 1 in 100 in the lowest income countries. So we're in a situation of vaccine inequity in the world. Next, I want to address why that matters. Why is that important? Well, it's important for at least 4 reasons. One is that as the epidemic rages in any country, as the pandemic rages in any country, no country is safe, because the more transmission there is, the more opportunity the virus has to mutate and create variants. So you've probably heard in the last few days about the variant B1617, which was found in India. That variant is there because the virus is raging and mutating. And before that, you probably heard about the P1 variant, which was in Brazil and also moved to British Columbia. And again, that was there because the virus was mutated. So the first reason that vaccine inequity is important is because if this fire of COVID is burning anywhere in the world, the embers are sparking off and going everywhere in the world. And so if we want to end the pandemic and we don't want variants driving it, then it has to be controlled everywhere. The second reason that vaccine inequity is important is because of ethics. Inequity is immoral. Human life is the same. The dignity of a human person is the same in Canada as it is in Zimbabwe, as it is in Vietnam. And so there's no good ethical reason for this inequitable access. And of course, underlying equity is the issue of solidarity. Because if you don't feel a sense of solidarity with others, you don't really care about inequity. And underlying solidarity is empathy. Because if you don't feel empathy for people, then you don't feel solidarity. And if you don't feel solidarity, you don't feel equity. So the second reason that vaccine inequity is bad is for moral reasons. The third reason is economic reasons. There is no restarting of global trade and no economic recovery without controlling the pandemic everywhere. It's estimated that the costs of the pandemic are in the trillions, over $9 trillion. And if we want to restart global trade and domestic economies, the only way to solve the economic crisis is to solve the public health crisis, and that needs to be solved everywhere. So far we've got basically the generation of variants, we've got the ethics reasons, we've got the economic reasons, and finally, I think that we can also think about vaccine inequity as an issue in national security. The people most at risk throughout the world are health workers because they're exposed to risk as they're caring for patients. They're about 3% of the world's population, 2 to 3%, and have been about 14% of the cases of COVID. And we've seen many tragic cases of health workers who've died. Now, health workers and health systems can be seen as critical infrastructure of countries, and critical infrastructure is a key part of national security. These are obviously transnational threats. And so I think there's also a national security case to be made for resolving the pandemic everywhere, and therefore vaccine equity. But also remember the 1-2 punch. It's not just vaccines, it's also public health measures. So in this second bit, I've tried to argue that vaccine equity is a bad thing for at least 4 reasons. The variants, which will just continue to drive the pandemic everywhere, the ethical reasons, the economic reasons, and the national security reasons. So far, we've described what vaccine equity is. 1 in 4 people having the vaccine in a country like Canada, more than 1 in 4 in Canada, less than 1 in 100 in low-income countries. We've talked about why it's a bad thing, and now what I'd like to do is address what we can do about it. And to think about what we can do about vaccine equity, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is scarce here? And I want you to think here about the 3 Ds. Dollars, they're scarce. Doses, vaccine doses, they're scarce. And domestic manufacturing, know-how, and intellectual property. So first, dollars. The WHO, with its partners, has established, and actually it's the 1-year anniversary today, something called the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, which is meant to accelerate the development of and ensure the equitable allocation and distribution around the world of COVID tools, diagnostics, drugs, vaccines, and devices, oxygen, personal protective equipment, and so on. That COVAX facility has so far distributed more than 40 million doses of vaccine in more than 100 countries. However, it has a financial gap of about $19 billion, and that gap needs to be closed. Now, $19 billion might seem like a lot of money, and that's the financial needs of the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator to the end of this year. But relative to the tens of trillions of dollars in stimulus spending that have been required as a result of the pandemic, it's actually a fantastic buy. It's got great return on investment. So it's a few billion now, or trillions, actually tens of trillions later. So the first thing that one can do to help resolve the vaccine inequities is to close the gap on COVAX in terms of dollars. And I'm proud to say that Canada is one of the top financial contributors to COVAX and to the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator. It's contributed 900 million, a little bit more than $900 million, I think about $910 million. And that's very, very much appreciated. So what do we do about it? First D, dollars, closing that $19 billion gap. But it doesn't help to have dollars if you can't translate those dollars into vaccine doses. And that's actually the situation we're in today because of the scarcity of vaccine production. So the second D is doses, sharing doses. Just today, on the occasion of the first anniversary of the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, President Macron of France announced that France would be sharing vaccine doses that they ordered with the COVAX facility for equitable distribution around the world, beginning in West Africa. And he said they would share 500,000 doses by June and about 5% of their doses by the end of the year. So the second D is sharing doses, and the hope is that other countries will also follow suit. So what can we do about vaccine inequity? We can close the financial gap in COVAX of $19 billion. We can share doses, and the very concrete example of President Macron in France and what he announced today in terms of sharing vaccine doses, and that's a model for every country in the world. And the third thing we can do is establish domestic manufacturing, because what you see is a complicated picture around the world of countries that have domestic manufacturing are actually more self-reliant. And there's whole continents that don't have manufacturing of vaccines. And Africa, the African continent, is an example. So sharing domestic manufacturing or developing domestic manufacturing by sharing know-how and sharing intellectual property is the third D. It's a midterm solution. It might take 6 months, maybe 12 months to get those plants up and running, but it's not forever. And that is what will bring you self-reliance. So think about that saying, if you give a person a fish versus if you teach them to fish. The same thing here. Give a person a vaccine and they'll be give a country a vaccine, or give a country vaccines and they'll be vaccinated for a day. Teach a country how to make vaccines and they'll be vaccinated for a lifetime. And it's the same kind of principle. So in this regard, WHO announced about a week ago that it would create a knowledge transfer hub, a tech transfer hub for mRNA vaccines, which of course is one of the vaccine platforms. It's the one that's behind the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines. And this is based on a model technology transfer hub that WHO developed for influenza vaccines between 2006 and 2016 that substantially increased the production of influenza vaccines in the world. So transferring this type of know-how is important. It may need to come along with temporary easing of intellectual property. And in fact, there is a proposal from India and South Africa to the World Trade Organization for temporary suspension of intellectual property related to COVID tools during the time of the pandemic. That's a proposal that WHO has supported, if necessary, for the technology transfer. And so this midterm issue I spent a little bit of time on, because it's the ultimate path to self-reliance, and self-reliance is actually what leads to interdependence and solidarity. Now, the SDGs are universal, as you know from your UN studies, and this is relevant here because if you followed the Canadian federal budget on Monday, you will have seen a substantial amount of money for domestic biomanufacturing. I think it was $1 billion into a strategic initiatives fund. It was about $2.2 billion in total for a cluster of biomanufacturing life sciences initiatives. But there's a very interesting history here in Canada, interesting and unfortunate, that goes all the way back to the Avro Aero and then the sale of Keynote Labs and essentially the hollowing out of Canada's own ability to do vaccine manufacturing. And that budget is aiming to reestablish that. So my point is that this is an issue that's relevant in Canada, and it's an issue that's relevant around the world. There are initiatives, for example, by the African Union to establish biomanufacturing facilities in Senegal, in Rwanda, in South Africa. And so this is now a very relevant and live issue. So I went on a little bit long about that third piece, which is what one can do about vaccine equity. One can close the dollar gap, $19 billion for COVAX. One could share doses, because it doesn't help to have dollars if you can't translate them into doses because the production is scarce. And I gave you the example of France announcing today, President Macron, that that's exactly what they would be doing. And then one can also establish domestic manufacturing, perhaps at the regional level. And I talked a little bit about that. So on vaccine equity, we've got the issue of what is it? The billion doses, the 83%, the 1 in 4 versus the 1 in 100. Why is it important? Generation of variants, the ethical reasons, the economic reasons, the national security reasons, and what to do about it. Close the dollar gap, share the doses, establish domestic manufacturing, could be at the regional level. Not every country out of 194 countries in the world, for example, necessarily needs its own domestic manufacturing. Now, these issues will all be discussed and debated in the World Health Assembly in a few weeks' time under the kind of overarching heading of a pandemic treaty that is looking at countermeasures, one of which is vaccines. It's looking at future pandemic preparedness, financing, and mutual accountability and trust. So what I'm really trying to say here is that a very pragmatic, practical issue like vaccine distribution, vaccine equity, translates very much into the type of resolutions, debates, discussions that you'll be having over the coming days. And in this case, the specific example is discussions around a pandemic treaty at the World Health Assembly, which is a meeting of 194 health ministers, which is effectively the governance of the World Health Organization, which is both the Secretariat and the member states. So, having introduced this topic, or introduced this talk by focusing on the importance of young people and arguing that equity is in your hands, having zeroed in and gone deep on one topic, vaccine equity, I want to close by really focusing back on you, on young people, and some things you might consider as you're planning your own future. I said equity's in your hands, and so my first bit of advice to young people is to find a problem and solve it. Find a problem and solve it. And, the great John Evans, who was, I think he went to UTS, and he was president of the University of Toronto. He once said to me, the late, great John Evans, he once said to me, it doesn't matter what it says on the outside of your tombstone. What matters is what it says on the inside of your tombstone. And what he meant by that was find a problem and solve it. What really matters is the problems you've solved and the impact you've had. And that's how I suggest that you think about your own careers. And even though we're talking about global issues now, there are local problems that you can find to solve, maybe even with innovative solutions. And that's actually my top line advice to young people, because when you go and look for a job or when you have an interview for next university career, the most potent thing you can say is, look, here's a problem I confronted. Here's how I solved it. This is the result. Then you just do that sequentially. So that's my top line advice. Then next is to embrace failure. When I was young, I thought failure was bad, and I was always trying to put a rosy face on everything. That was a mistake, because you can really progress so much better if you just embrace failure. The question isn't whether you're going to fail or not. Everybody fails. I can give you a long list of my own failures. The question is whether you can fail fast, cheap, and learn from it. And so embrace it, be honest about it, embrace failure. Third bit of advice would be to find the right mentors. Ask yourself, what do you want to be doing 10 years from now? And then ask yourself, who are the 3 people who are doing that right now? That might require a little bit of internet research. Make sure it's a diverse group. Reach out to them, ask for their advice, and there's a 90% chance that they'll be happy to give it to you, and you can convert them into mentors, because everyone loves to give advice. And one of the mistakes I might have made is not to seek out and have a diverse enough group of mentors when I was your age. Next bit of advice I'd have for young people, and the reason I'm going through this, obviously, is if I'm going to argue that equity is in your hands, then I have to back that up with some suggestions about how you can actually execute on that idea. Obviously, the top thing is to find a problem in equity or challenge in equity and find it, but embracing failure, finding the right mentors are all part of it, as is acknowledging your own privilege and leaning out. So, for example, at Grand Challenges Canada, there were a couple of terrific vice presidents, women, who were doing a fantastic job. And over time, they just did a better and better and better job, until the point that they were doing a better job than I was. I leaned out, there was a search, and now they're the 2 co-CEOs pursuing a feminist model of co-CEOs at Grand Challenges Canada. So acknowledging privilege, whether it's on the basis of gender, whether it's on the basis of BIPOC, what have you, acknowledge that privilege and lean out. Finally, 2 more things. Hop aboard a rocket ship if you see one passing by. For me, that rocket ship was Grand Challenges Canada. If you see a rocket ship pass by, hop on it and go for the ride. And, in Canadian terms, don't go to where the puck is, go to where the puck is going, to quote Wayne Gretzky. A lot of people, when they're choosing a university career or choosing a career, actually go to where everyone else is going. Well, go to where everyone else is not going. For me, the example there was in the mid-1980s, I went to do bioethics at the University of Chicago. At that time, very few people were doing bioethics inside the profession. And so that worked out relatively well because it was an open space and you could do more. So go to where people are not. So in closing here, what I've done is almost shifted gears, and I beg your indulgence in doing that, from the focus on COVID, from the focus on the United Nations, the focus on equity, the focus on vaccine equity, to a focus on you. Because it's so important, the choices that you make as young people, because equity is in your hands, because you are the group that can really make the change, not even in the future, in the immediate weeks to come, as we're struggling with this pandemic and with the challenges of equity and with the harsh spotlight that it's shone on the inequities in our society. And that connects, I think, very much with the top line advice here to young people of finding a problem and solving it. And I backed up that advice with some other thoughts and suggestions you may wish to reflect upon. And the reason I did all that is on many of these scores, I myself made a number of mistakes. And I don't want you to make the same mistakes. I want you to be able to have the maximum impact, especially on the equity challenges that we all face together. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your attention. And I think we've got at least 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less for Q&A. And I really look forward to your questions. questions. It's really a privilege to be with you. It's like 11 o'clock here in Geneva, but I'm delighted to stay up and to spend this time with you, because I really believe in the power of young people and the power of young people to redress these terrible inequities that have been made so obvious and so evident by the pandemic. So with that, I'll stop here. Look forward to your questions and see you on Twitter. I'm at Peter A. Singer and look forward to connecting with you. So back to you, whoever wants to handle the Q&A, and really look forward to engaging.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we have about 17 minutes for Q&A questions. Obviously, you are in Switzerland, so we don't want to keep you up too long. And I also think that all our delegates, especially in the WHO, will be considering not only vaccine equity and distribution, but also equity more broadly, and that our delegates certainly have the power to make a difference, not just in the future, but now. And I think Model UN is a good place to start. So let's get to some questions. We have a number coming in. A reminder that delegates can ask them at the in the description of the video, and Dr. Singer's Twitter handle is also in the description of the video that you're watching now. So our first question is one that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now. Dan Van Tanden from Abbey Park High School in Oakville asks, based on our current estimates for vaccine rollout and case data, when do you believe global herd immunity will be achieved?
Yeah, the real question is when the pandemic will end. And remember that 1-2 punch. So it's vaccines and other tools, plus the public health measures. Never forget that some countries actually were able to defeat COVID mostly through public health measures. And, there's a number of examples of that, especially in East Asia. So it's really that 1-2 punch. When will the pandemic end? It's almost impossible to know. I do think that there really is hope that's dawning. If you look at Israel, for example, which has some of the highest rates of vaccination, Israel is almost getting back to normal. And so I do think that in a matter of weeks to months, things will gradually get much better. At the moment, though, Canada's in the midst of a terrible third wave, with cases rising, deaths starting to rise, heartbreaking stories of intensive care units overflowing. So while there is hope on the horizon, this really is the darkness before the dawn. And it's very difficult to know when this will end. It might be easier to know when the vaccines will roll out. Herd immunity is a bit of a fungible concept, but certainly the vaccine rollout seems to be going quite well in Canada in terms of the rate of rollout. It's one of the highest rates in the G7 and in the G20. But at the same time, that people are posting vaccine selfies, and we're proud of the high rates of vaccination and how many vaccines we've procured. Please always remember, even the health workers and the people at high risk in countries around the world whose rates of vaccination in those populations are less than 1%. So it's this dynamic, and that's why I focus so much on vaccine equity. So, in summary, vaccine rollout going well. That is now above 1 in 4. That'll happen according to public health officials. I think they said by September. But it's not only about the vaccine; it's also about the public health measures. And don't forget the people around the world, because even if you achieve so-called herd immunity and get a good vaccine rollout in Canada, it's not going to make a difference. It'll make a difference, but we'll still be at risk if the virus is raging anywhere, because it's this fire that's throwing off embers that invariably will go around the world, including variants.
Absolutely. Our next question, I think, is very topical, and I think it connects well to the points you just made, Dr. Singer, about the disparities not only between Canada and our vaccine rollout, some of the successes that we're having, and maybe the lack of equity between us and other countries, but also inequities within Canada. And on that note, this is a question that's very topical, especially over the past week. Dahlia Ahmed from St. Francis Xavier Secondary in Milton asks, do you think that extra policing will better enforce stay-at-home orders and contribute positively to fighting the virus?
COVID's not a police problem. COVID's a public health problem. COVID's a problem of communities. COVID's a problem of trust. And so, I think that the real lens here is a public health lens, a trust lens. And if you delve into the social determinants a little bit, these types of solutions you come up with you see these heartrending cases of people in the intensive care unit, often new immigrants, often racialized communities, essential workers. They can't sit at home and watch Zoom all day. They have to take crowded public transport. They might live in crowded circumstances. They are expected to show up at work. And that's really, at the moment, driving the pandemic. So the types of solutions to think about for a problem like that are things like paid sick leave. So people actually don't feel they have to go to work if they're sick and are incentivized to follow very sensible public health measures. So this is just another example of how equity is really critical. And one brings a public health and a social determinants of health lens to this. And one focuses on redressing those inequities. And in Toronto, you see a perfect example of that. Initially, when you looked at Toronto in the very earliest phases, you found that about 50-something percent of Torontonians were from racialized communities, but those communities represented 80-something percent of the hospitalized cases. That led to more measurement of disaggregated data, better targeting essentially of those postal codes with a focus on the public health measures initially, then the vaccinations, and actually a reduction in those disparities. And those measures were taken by groups from the community themselves. And a really good place to read about this is the work of Juan McKenzie, who's the CEO of the Wellesley Institute, who recently published a paper in The Lancet about this. And so I think this is really a public health problem. One brings a public health lens with a focus on equity, with a focus on social determinants, and redressing those inequities can actually help tamp down the cases, as is the case. And now you see actually targeting of vaccination in Toronto as a follow-on to certain postal codes. Those postal codes are kind of shorthand for places where the social determinants are there, where the rates are high, and where the focus really needs to be.
Absolutely. For a few more questions, so apologies to those watching if we don't get to them all. Our next question sort of takes a more global lens rather than a local one. Maya Henderson from Nelson High School asks, how has the WHO been working in tandem with political leaders of high and middle income countries, such as the Minister of International Development, Karina Gould, who may be Maya's MP in Burlington, I'm not sure, to ensure that lower income countries receiving much needed vaccinations now and in the future?
Firstly, just a bit of a shout out to Minister Gould, who I know. She's really taken a very active role in the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator I mentioned. So Canada is contributing not just money, but also engagement and leadership. Now, to take a step back on the issue of leadership more generally, I've argued that leadership is the ultimate vaccine. to the pandemic and to the conjoint problems we face in terms of climate change, racism, economic inequality, and conflict, and so on around the world. So and leadership is extremely important. That happens at the highest levels of government, and it happens right down in communities, and it happens with you, which is why I focused on the fact that equity was in your hands and tried to give some thoughts and some tools. The specific question was, how does the WHO work with leaders? So firstly, the board, if you will, of the WHO is 194 health ministers of the world, and they're meeting in 3 weeks or 4 weeks virtually, actually, in the World Health Assembly, which happens annually. But what you see as a result of the pandemic is the engagement of the highest levels of government with the WHO and with my friend and colleague, Dr. Tedros, who's the Director General. So today, for example, the event around the 1-year anniversary of the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator started with an address by President Ramaphosa from South Africa. President Macron also spoke from France. Karina Gould actually spoke. The Norwegian Development Minister spoke. And many high-level officials, heads of state, foreign ministers, finance ministers, and of course development and health ministers have been involved in the response. The G20 is a very relevant body, as is the G7 for WHO, and the issues of governance and the governance of all member states, which is what you get from the World Health Assembly, is actually one of the most important assets of WHO. It's the only place in the world where 194 governments come together in a systematic way to find international cooperation on matters of health. And, beyond equity, if there's one thing we've learned in the pandemic, it's the importance of that kind of international cooperation, because these global challenges, like the pandemic, require global solutions. So that's how WHO engages with the G20, with the G7, with health ministers through the World Health Assembly, and through this pandemic, often with heads of state and other senior ministers as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. I think, from a Model UN lens as well, cooperation not only between organs of the UN like the WHO and domestic leaders in country like Canada and like Minister Gould is extremely important. We don't want to take up too much of your time, so I think we'll leave it to one final question. Apologies if you asked a question we didn't get to it. We'll try to tomorrow when we have Ambassador Voschuk here. But Dr. Singer, I'll ask this question to you on a more personal note. Eli from AHSS asks, knowing what you know now, what would you recommend your younger self do differently? What courses would you have taken? What experiences would you have wanted to have? And what opportunities or experiences do you wish you capitalized on?
Well, thank you, Eli, for that question. By the way, could I just say, if you had a question that didn't get answered, tweet it at me, and I'll answer it on Twitter, probably tomorrow. But I'd be glad to engage and do that. Eli, it's the kind of things I was talking about. So take the top line advice: find a problem and solve it. When I first started, a little bit further along than you all are, but when I first started working in a hospital, I was focused on bioethics, and I was focused on improving end-of-life care. And right in front of my office, there was a ward with patients that had, because this is the mortality rate, or was at the time, of inpatient general internal medicine, mortality rate of about 14%. Instead of focusing on that issue and improving the end-of-life care of the people right in front of me, I started sending surveys about living wills to long-term care facilities and so on. So that taught me a lesson about just looking right in front of your nose at the most proximate problem you can solve and solving it. And so that would be advice to my younger self, to look right in front of your nose at what problem. And in this case, I'm suggesting It's the problems in equity that are most in front of us now. I mentioned earlier that I wasn't very good at embracing failure, but over the years I've learned that the more you embrace failure and learn from it, actually the better you can become at problem solving. In terms of finding the right mentors, I wasn't systematic enough about that. I didn't do it in a systematic way like I described, and I wish I had, because that diversity of advice would have been helpful. I didn't really acknowledge privilege or lean out. I was a little overly aggressive, and so leaning out a little bit, acknowledging privilege, elevating diverse voices, I think I could have done a lot better. I was pretty good at hopping aboard rocket ships, be that Grand Challenges Canada or another one. And I was pretty good, I think, at going in areas where others were not. But, in terms of that systematic list of advice, I think, what was it, 4 of the 6 things I didn't do that well at the beginning. And one of the reasons I like to go through that is I think by talking about that explicitly, you can at least reflect on how that applies to your own life, and whether there's any lessons to learn there from some of the mistakes that I made. And I think, let me close, since I think we're heading towards closure, right, Matt? By again thanking you for the privilege of being with you. It's always terrific to be with young people. Canada is an amazing country to be in, to live in, and I think we can all feel very proud of Canada. And at the same time, it's a fantastic platform to be solving problems. And again, a key lesson of COVID is equity. Equity's in your hands, and that's something, it's not for somebody else. You can do something about that. And then finally, maybe the most fundamental lesson of the pandemic is that character really matters. Character matters, kindness matters. And in these stressful times, I guess my last bit of advice around that would be, and I don't want to sound overly schmaltzy, but to be kind. That's really, I think, a very, very important lesson of the pandemic. So it's been wonderful to be with you. Glad to answer any other questions on Twitter. Glad to continue to connect with you. Congratulations on all that you're doing, including this fantastic assembly. Obviously, I'm an advocate for the United Nations system. I think it really makes a difference in the world, particularly for the most vulnerable people in the world. You can really see through COVID how important an organization like the World Health Organization actually is to peace and security in the world, and health, which is so closely related to peace and security. And again, just a real privilege to be with you. Thank you so much. And Matt, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singer, for joining us, not only for taking time out of not only a busy schedule, but in the middle of the night, your time in Switzerland. So we'd like to thank you once again for joining us and for answering our delegates' questions as well. I'll remind delegates that they can tweet Dr. Singer at the Twitter handle we've provided in the description of this video. And with that, this brings closing ceremonies to an end. Thank you to Secretariat for joining us, Mr. Cook, our staff advisor, and once again, Dr. Peter Singer for his keynote speech as well, and to Kat Krieger for a land acknowledgement, who was here earlier. So at this moment, we may have gone a little past 5:30. That's absolutely fine if you're a delegate watching this. You're not late to your committee at all, because we're still getting into them ourselves, and we will send a document with all of the links out to you momentarily. So do not worry if we're a couple minutes behind schedule, because we had such an amazing guest speaker with us today. So with that, I will let everybody get to their committees, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Singer.